the brown shirt. Right now, there are people who think Nazi uniforms were designed to look intimidating and powerful. But here's what they don't know. The most iconic Nazi uniform, the brown shirt of the SA stormtroopers, existed purely by accident. It wasn't chosen for psychological warfare or symbolic meaning. It was chosen because it was cheap surplus nobody else wanted. This is the untold story of how Nazi uniforms came to be, and it reveals something disturbing about how ordinary clothing can become symbols of terror. Every uniform tells a story, but Nazi uniforms tell a story of transformation, theft, and the weaponization of fashion itself. By the end of this video, you'll never look at uniforms the same way again. Let's start with that brown shirt, because its origin story exposes the myth of Nazi organizational genius. In 1921, the early Nazi party was broke. They needed uniforms for their paramilitary wing, the Sturmabteilung, or SA, but they had no money for custom designs. So they did what any cash-strapped organization would do. They bought surplus. The brown shirts came from leftover German colonial uniforms, originally intended for troops in German Southwest Africa, modern-day Namibia. These uniforms had been sitting in warehouses since Germany lost its African colonies after World War I. They were brown not because brown represented earth or strength or any ideological concept. They were brown because that's what was available at a discount. The SA added leather belts, red armbands with black swastikas, and suddenly surplus colonial uniforms became the signature look of Nazi street fighters. For the next decade, these brown-shirted thugs terrorized political opponents, broke up meetings, and fought street battles across Germany. The uniform that started as a budget decision became synonymous with Nazi violence. But here's where it gets interesting. The brown shirts' success created their own destruction. By 1934, SA membership had grown to over 3 million men, making them larger than the German army. Hitler saw them as a threat to his power. So during the Night of the Long Knives, he had SA leadership murdered and the organization gutted. The brown shirt era was over, replaced by something far more sinister: the black uniform. When you picture a Nazi, you probably see black. The SS uniform, designed by Hugo Boss himself, represents one of history's most successful examples of fashion as psychological warfare. But this wasn't just about looking good. This was about creating fear through fabric. Heinrich Himmler understood something crucial. If the SA looked like a gang of street thugs, the SS needed to look like the embodiment of state power. In 1932, he commissioned Hugo Boss to create uniforms that would make the SS appear as the ultimate authority. The result was a masterpiece of intimidation design. The black tunic, silver insignia, peaked cap with death's head, polished boots, everything calculated for maximum psychological impact. The color, black itself, was chosen deliberately. Black represents authority, formality, and death across cultures. When an SS officer walked into a room, his uniform announced his power before he said a word. But here's what most people don't realize. These uniforms were impractical for actual military use. The black wool was hot, the tight fit restricted movement, and the silver insignia made perfect targets for enemy snipers. These weren't combat uniforms, they were terror uniforms, designed for parades, ceremonies, and intimidation. The SS black uniform served its purpose perfectly until war made it obsolete. You can't fight a world war in parade dress. Which brings us to the next transformation. Field grey. When World War II began, the SS traded their intimidating black for practical field grey. The same organization, the same ideology, but now dressed for killing rather than intimidating. This uniform change reveals something crucial about how organizations adapt their image to their function. The Waffen-SS field uniform looked almost identical to regular German army uniforms, with one crucial difference: the collar tabs. Those small silver runes, the double lightning bolts, mark the difference between a regular soldier and an SS fanatic. Same grey wool, same cut, but those tiny symbols changed everything about what the uniform represented. This camouflage of normalcy was intentional. The Waffen-SS wanted to appear as elite soldiers, not political enforcers. But their war crimes record tells a different story. Units like the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler and the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend committed some of the war's worst atrocities while wearing uniforms that looked like any other German unit. The field grey uniform shows how organizations can hide their true nature behind conventional appearances. But if you think that's disturbing, wait until you see how the Nazis militarized childhood itself. And if you're finding these uniform revelations as shocking as I am, make sure to subscribe, because we're uncovering the hidden psychology behind the clothing that shaped history's darkest chapter. The Hitler Youth uniform. Picture a Boy Scout uniform but designed to create soldiers instead of citizens. The Hitler Youth uniform of brown shirt, black shorts and leather accessories looked innocent enough, but it represented something far more sinister, the systematic militarization of German childhood. Established in 1936, the Hitler Youth uniform was mandatory for all German boys aged 10 to 18. The brown shirt connected them visually to the SA tradition, while the black shorts and knee-high socks gave them a distinctly youthful appearance. But look closer at the details. The leather belt with Nazi buckle, the shoulder straps indicating rank, the dagger inscribed with blood and honor. This wasn't a youth organization uniform. This was a military uniform scaled down for children. Boys as young as 10 wore rank insignia, carried ceremonial weapons, and learned to march in formation. The uniform taught them that they were soldiers first, children second. The psychological impact was devastating. German boys grew up believing that wearing a uniform, following orders, and preparing for war were normal parts of childhood. The Hitler Youth uniform didn't just clothe bodies, it shaped minds, creating a generation that saw militarism as natural and necessary. But the militarization of youth extended beyond boys, revealing an even more insidious aspect of Nazi uniform psychology. The League of German Girls uniform. While boys learned to be soldiers, girls learned to be mothers for the Reich. The Bund Deutscher Mädel uniform of white blouse, dark skirt and brown jacket looked modest and traditional, but it represented a calculated effort to control female identity through clothing. The uniform's design emphasized traditional femininity, while subtly preparing girls for their role in Nazi society. The white blouse symbolized purity, the dark skirt represented modesty, and the brown jacket connected them to the broader Nazi movement. But unlike the boys' military-style accessories, girls wore simple neckerchiefs and minimal insignia. This wasn't accidental. The uniform reinforced Nazi gender ideology that women should be mothers and homemakers, not soldiers or leaders. Girls learned through their clothing that their value lay in supporting the regime through traditional domestic roles, not challenging it through independent action. The contrast between male and female Nazi youth uniforms reveals how clothing can enforce social hierarchies and gender roles. But these youth uniforms were just preparation for the adult uniforms that would define Nazi Germany's military machine. The Wehrmacht uniform. Here's where Nazi uniform history gets complicated. Because not every German soldier was a Nazi. The Wehrmacht, Germany's regular army, wore uniforms that looked remarkably similar to those of other European militaries. Field grey wool, practical cut, minimal decoration. These uniforms represented military tradition, not political ideology. The Wehrmacht uniform traced its design back to Prussian military traditions dating to the 19th century. The field grey color was adopted in 1907, long before the Nazi Party existed. The cut and style emphasized functionality over intimidation, reflecting the army's focus on combat effectiveness rather than political symbolism. But here's the crucial detail. Every Wehrmacht uniform carried Nazi symbols. The eagle and swastika on the chest, the Nazi Party emblem on the helmet, the belt buckle inscribed with God with us, but featuring Nazi imagery. These small additions transformed traditional military uniforms into vehicles for Nazi ideology. This subtle integration of Nazi symbols into traditional military dress shows how totalitarian movements infiltrate existing institutions. The Wehrmacht uniform looked normal, traditional, even respectable. But those small Nazi additions marked every German soldier as a participant in Hitler's war of conquest and genocide. The transformation becomes even clearer when you see how the Nazis adapted uniforms for their most elite and feared units. The Luftwaffe uniform. If the army represented tradition and the SS represented terror, the Luftwaffe represented modernity and technological superiority. Their blue-grey uniforms, designed specifically for aviation, projected an image of cutting-edge military capability. The Luftwaffe uniform was introduced in 1935, when Germany openly violated the Treaty of Versailles by rebuilding its air force. The blue-grey color distinguished pilots from Army Field Grey and SS Black, while the cut emphasized the technical nature of aerial warfare. Pilots wore leather flight jackets, silk scarves, and specialized equipment that made them look like technological warriors. Hermann Göring, the Luftwaffe commander, was obsessed with uniform design and personal appearance. He created multiple uniform variants for different occasions, from practical flight suits to elaborate dress uniforms dripping with medals and decorations. Göring's own uniforms were custom-tailored works of art that cost more than most Germans earned in a year. But beneath the stylish appearance, Luftwaffe uniforms carried the same Nazi symbols as every other German military branch. The eagle and swastika, the party emblems, the ideological markers that connected even the most technical military service to Nazi political goals. The Luftwaffe uniform shows how the Nazis used modern, attractive design to make their ideology appealing to educated, technical personnel who might otherwise resist crude political symbolism. But the most revealing Nazi uniforms weren't worn by soldiers at all. They were worn by the bureaucrats who made genocide possible. The political uniform. The most dangerous Nazis didn't wear military uniforms. They wore business suits with small Nazi pins, brown party uniforms for rallies, and administrative clothing that made mass murder look like paperwork. These political uniforms reveal the banality of evil in Nazi Germany. Nazi party officials wore brown uniforms for ceremonies and rallies, but their daily work clothes were surprisingly ordinary. A simple Nazi party pin on a civilian suit jacket was often the only visible sign of ideological commitment. These men planned deportations, organized ghettos, and administered genocide while dressed like accountants and clerks. The political uniform's ordinariness was its most frightening aspect. It showed how normal-looking people could participate in extraordinary evil. The bureaucrats who organized the Holocaust didn't look like monsters. They looked like middle managers, which in many ways they were. This normalization of evil through ordinary dress codes reveals how totalitarian systems make the unthinkable seem routine. When genocide becomes a desk job, the uniform becomes a business suit. But perhaps the most chilling uniforms were worn by those who carried out the final solution directly. The concentration camp uniform. The guards wore modified SS uniforms, but the prisoners wore something designed to strip away their humanity. Striped pajamas that turned human beings into numbers. This wasn't just clothing, it was psychological warfare designed to break the human spirit. The prisoner uniform of blue and white stripes served multiple purposes. It made escape nearly impossible since the distinctive pattern could be spotted from a distance. It eliminated individual identity by making everyone look identical. It marked the wearer as subhuman in the eyes of guards and civilians. But here's what's most disturbing. These uniforms were designed by the same system that created the elegant SS black uniforms and practical Wehrmacht field grey. The Nazis understood that clothing shapes identity, so they used uniforms both to empower their followers and to dehumanize their victims. The concentration camp uniform represents the ultimate expression of Nazi uniform psychology, the complete control of human identity through clothing. When you control what people wear, you control how they see themselves and how others see them. So, there you have it. Nazi uniforms weren't just clothing, they were weapons. The brown shirts that started as surplus colonial uniforms. The black SS uniforms designed by Hugo Boss to create fear. The field grey that made fanatics look like regular soldiers. The youth uniforms that militarized childhood. The political uniforms that made genocide look like bureaucracy. The camp uniforms that stripped away humanity itself. Each uniform tells a story of how clothing can be weaponized to create identity, enforce hierarchy, and normalize evil. The Nazis understood that uniforms don't just reflect power, they create it. When you control what people wear, you control who they become. That's the real lesson of Nazi uniforms. Clothing is never neutral. Every uniform makes a statement about power, identity, and values. Understanding this helps us recognize how authoritarian movements use fashion and symbolism to advance their goals. If this deep dive into the psychology of Nazi uniforms opened your eyes to how clothing shapes history, you'll want to check out our other videos where we uncover the hidden stories behind the symbols and uniforms that changed the world. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss these revealing historical investigations. There's so much more hidden history waiting to be discovered, and we're just getting started.